Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we finished up the book of Hosea by looking at Hosea chapter 14. And this is the basically love poem that Hosea uses to finish this message that he has from God. And you'll notice that it is a lot of a repetition of things that have gone before, but it's basically a summation of what's happening and return, right? You'll see that right at the beginning. At least the ESV puts it at the beginning of verse 1. Return, O Israel, to the Lord your God. This is a consistent theme that is brought up again and again. You see it in chapter 2. I have a list here: chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 12, right? So it goes throughout the entire book of Hosea, this idea to return, right? Return to God. And it's interesting because I actually really spent time on 2 and 3. That's where I think like where we see the rubber meets the road, as it were, for this whole book, but at least for chapter 14. But I want to first look at these 4 through 9 because it talks about a love. That's the love poem I'm talking about, right? God uses this very verdant meaning green, verdant having to do with the environment, right, with trees and plant life, imagery to talk about his relationship with Israel. And you'll notice that he relates himself to a dew, and that Israel will become like a lily, like a tree that's in blossom, like olives, things like that, right? It's this beautiful way of talking about the love that God is going to pour out, and that ultimately comes through Jesus Christ, right? Because he's going to heal their apostasy. Well, we know from history that they don't listen to Hosea, right? And I mean, God says that he's going to bring justice, right? They don't listen. So, how is this healing brought? Because it's not as though they actually do turn and come back. Maybe some of them do. Not everyone in the Northern Kingdom is evil or not caring about what God has to say, but a lot of them, do that. But how do they get that healing? Well, that healing, as Christians, we would say comes through Jesus. This is where we ultimately see the promises here lived out of God giving things for free, right? He actually says that I will love them freely. We call that grace, unmerited love, which is the grace of Christianity, right? So that's what God is wants them to come to. He wants to bring Ephraim to that and Israel to do that. And he gives them a prayer that they can pray, right? Like this is in verses 2 and 3, and I actually think this is really important because this is where we can insert our own words for how we fall into this trap. Because the biggest thing that you can fail to take away from the Old Testament is seeing the people of Israel as different from yourself. And what I mean by that is that we won't fall into the same traps and idolatries that they do. We know better. I mean, I've literally read theologians who believe stuff like that. And that is the wrong thing to take away from the Old Testament, right? It's not in terms of judgment, oh, look how bad they are, but oh, wow, we have this same tendency. And if it were not for the grace of Christ, we would easily fall into this problem as well. So I just want to look really quickly at verses 2 and 3. This is what Hosea tells them to do. He says, "Take with you words and return to the Lord. Say to him, take away all iniquity, accept what is good, and we will pay with bulls the vows of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses, and we will say no more, our God, to the work of our hands. In you the orphan finds mercy." Now, if you were to just take that, that's obviously as phrases weird to people who have not read Hosea, right? If you're like, oh wow, this is a beautiful prayer or a beautiful thing to say, people will go, why? That doesn't seem beautiful, it seems weird. Which it is if you don't know the context, right? So firstly, they're gonna start saying things and following it with right action. So they come to him, they talk to him, they ask him to take away their sins and iniquity, and then they're going to actually fulfill the vows and do the law and the things that God requires them to do. Really important, right? Something that the prophets continually have to remind people of doing. God has to continue to remind people of doing it. Jesus has to come and remind people of doing that, right? So always very, very important. And then this is where we really should take words or things that we're trusting in today and put them in place of these things. So it says, Assyria shall not save us, and we will not ride on horses. So remember, Israel is trusting in their political alliances and their economic success with these different trading partners as what makes them special and important and shows that they're blessed, right? But God is saying here that always this prayer is suggesting that they turn away from these things where they're finding comfort and turn to God instead. So Assyria and the horses here specifically reference their geopolitical alliances that they're feeling protected by and their military power, right? And so as Americans, as Christians, no matter where you're from, you could take in things from your life, things that you're using to be a crutch for yourself or to as a source of your real protection rather than God, right? We just had, for instance, this is going to date this video insanely, so, but we just had an attempted assassination attempt on a former presidential candidate, right? So people in the United States, one of our big ticket items here is politics and thinking politics will save us, right? We just need to get the right person in the presidency and everything will be well. We just need to get these people on the Supreme Court or these people out or whatever else it is, right? Politics, politics, politics. So important to so many Americans. That's an idol, right? I'm not saying politics can't be important or doesn't play a role or you shouldn't care, right? Politics is a way that Christians are able to love our neighbors, but when it becomes whether or not the church lives or the truth wins, if our candidate wins, whatever the cost, that's wrong, right? That's wrong. That's an idol. And people do that across the spectrum in the United States. Money is another one that you can easily put in here, right? Finances, if we have this amount of money, then I'm protected. Trusting in finances more than you are trusting in God. Things that we are able to do. And the worst comes, and this is what God really attacks at the last part of this, and we will say no more, our God, to the work of our hands. And you, the orphan, finds mercy, right? So we take these things, and the worst thing we do is then we attach religion to it. So there are people who will say, well, if I have money, that means God's blessing me, right? The prosperity gospel. Or this candidate, he's God's ordained minister. He's, if only real Christians would support this person, stuff like that, right? Not good. Very bad, right? Could be that God is using them for something. God is using everyone for everything, but that's not, but when you attach God, believing in a Christian or being a Christian into following a certain type of politician, that's bad. No bueno, right? We're not supposed to do that. That's taking an idol. It's taking a work of our hands and making it into an idol. And that's, and associating it worse, associating that idol with God, with the God of the Bible who has no part in that, right? And then lastly, we see a turnaround, because you'll remember at the beginning, he has Hosea have children, and one of the children, a daughter, is named Lo Ruhumah, which means no mercy, and it's talking about God. But then in this prayer, we see that reversed. In you, the orphan finds mercy. So, like God, this whole prayer is a really beautiful way of talking about, let us do, God, give us the grace to follow you with word and in deed, and that we turn away from the idols, and that we don't associate idols with you, and we know that you are merciful to those who are outside or those who are left out, especially those, which is all of us, because we're all sinners. So that's what we talked about today. That's what Hosea is all about. I hope that was interesting to you guys. I'll see you all tomorrow for an episode of A New Thing, and then Sunday for worship. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Peace out.